My name is William D. Raymond. I've been a practicing artist for the last 36 years. I practice and teach what I call the aesthetics of spontaneity. It comes out of my relationship with the master I studied with, Antonio Salemi, who was a sculptor and painter, American, and he lived to be 102. He died in 1995. He was a New York artist for 43 years. He lived in Manhattan, had quite a career, a couple Guggenheim fellowships, a number of one-man shows in New York City, and quite a few anecdotes about the scene which he was involved in from the 20s. Anyway, he was a very spiritual man, and he meditated 2 hours a day in the Zen tradition from the time he was 59. And I had just come out of a yoga tradition when I started studying with him. I was in my late 20s. He was in his late 80s. And I had studied a yoga which was grounded in the spontaneous, in which the life energy dictated where the meditation went, and you surrendered your will to the life energy. Tony, through his practice and his art practice, had come into this realization that the spontaneous energy was everything, was the center and the essence of his practice as an artist. And so I could connect with that idea of his stress on the spontaneous, given my background as in the yoga. So through that relationship, I came up with what I call the aesthetics of spontaneity. In my work, I had not intended to work as a painter or an artist when I first met Antonio. I was just really fell in love with his work and thought it was great stuff. I don't want to get too much involved in the details of that at the moment, but I would like to read to you a quote that he gave us even before I was really hanging out with him. I was actually kind of working with a small local newspaper in the late 70s this was, and we interviewed him, and he gave us this quote on the nature of style, which is a few paragraphs long, and it really delineates the difference between style and stylization, which is maybe the real crux of the issue in the culture today. And it's the difference between also direct experience, which is a Zen principle, a Zen reality, which you want to see things as they are in the Zen, and conceptual experience, which is kind of what dominates the art and has really through our history different concepts of what painting and sculpture can be, what art is, etc. Tends to be conceptual in a lot of different ways, and that's another thing I'll talk about as I post these videos. But let me get to the quote. I'll read it to you, and there'll be links to where you can make a copy of this quote if you need to, present it for you below the video here. Okay, so here's the quote on style by Antonio Salemi. Style is most important, whether it be a book, a piece of music, a painting, or a piece of sculpture. But style is recognized only in retrospect. If one has style in mind while one is painting, one becomes stylistic. One produces a style after the Gothic or Renaissance or African. The style becomes superficial and becomes a manner, and we call that stylistic. My style comes out of my whole life. The style is the result of the state of mind of the artist, the subject matter one is handling, the state of one's health, and the clarity of one's mind. All of that goes into the work. After it's done, the style can be recognized. Whatever comes out is a spontaneous and mysterious thing. Style cannot be defined intellectually. It can be seen only in retrospect. For example, the Gothic style came out of the condition of France and Germany in the 13th and 14th century. The 12th century was Romanesque. After the Romanesque came the Gothic. The Romanesque was a result of the Roman Empire, the Greek art, and all of that. Then the Gothic came because the people began to express themselves more directly. It came out of the climate, the stones they had to work with, and their religious approach, their interpretation of Christianity. That whole thing produced what we call the Gothic style. And the word Gothic means barbarian, uncivilized. It was original expression, getting away from the Greek and the Roman. But it all came about in retrospect. The people who built the Gothic cathedrals built them as well as they could under the condition and the state of mind they were in. And out came what we call the Gothic style. So when someone does a painting, that same process takes place. Everything one is comes out in that painting. If one is able to be spontaneous, then there is spontaneity in the style and there is vigor in the brushstrokes. If one is not able to be spontaneous, because one is still immature and one is uncertain, then one's technique is not complete. Then style doesn't come through because one is still struggling with technique. If one has mastered the technique and lived and is still vigorous and paints with pleasure, then out comes what we call style. Style is never an intellectual and willful effort. It is like grace in the spiritual life. We try, we pray, we sit, we meditate. By the grace of God, in a mysterious way, we become enlightened. You don't become enlightened by mere effort. You don't achieve enlightenment. Enlightenment comes after great discipline and effort, but we don't achieve. It is the same with style and art. So that's the quote. That's something I've held on to for as long as I heard it, and I've revisited it every now and then over the years. And it's kind of a centering thing. It gives one of the clearest delineations of style and stylization that there is, that I've heard of or seen in all my studies. So I recommend it to you, and that's where I'm going to leave this today. My best to you. Have a great day.